We're just gonna go through, I guess, the big moves, Eli. We don't have to go through each guy. Some of them, obviously, Noble. We've spoken about countlessly.
Mhm.
We've covered his starts. Thomas White makes another big jump. I guess we could start there. We put him at 9, which kind of, I guess, we regret now, but we put him there just originally just to see kind of how he does in his first couple starts. But change around the organization happens. Jake Eater gets traded. A couple moves happen, and he winds up going up to 3. He kind of fits that model of a Marlins type prospect that you want, and as well as Noble Meyer. But Thomas White has some pretty good starts here and there, up and down trajectory there thus far. But Eli, just your thoughts on White. He was the Marlins comp pick this past draft.
He was there's just not a huge disparity between him and Noble, even though one of them is the first rounder and then the other one is that comp round pick. It's reflected in their signing bonuses, receiving almost the same money in this situation where White fell for until he reached a team that was willing to pay him what he thought he was worth in order to forego college. This was one of these other decisions from DJ that was very widely appreciated at the time. I think this was highly regarded. The Marlins strategy here for putting so much of their draft capital in just those two guys, between them over $8.5 million in signing bonus out of their bonus pool, thinking that both of them have pretty good chances of becoming above average starting pitchers in the majors if things go well. The risk is pretty obvious. They're both high school guys, so there's a long road to get there. For the time being, we've only seen them as up to low A. We haven't seen them give anything resembling a full length start. Noble made it into the 4th inning in his longest outing, and White, I don't even think made it quite that far. They
He
had
made
him
it to the second. That's the
Maybe
most.
hit him on a more gradual process, and he didn't, instead of stretching out. So for those guys, their first full year next year is going to be, health permitting, that's going to be a really revealing year in terms of how close they are, what steps they need in order to progress further. I mean, in White's case, I would say that what excites me is both the fastball velo already hitting the mid 90s from the left side for somebody that still has room to fill out, and the fact that his changeup is further along than you see usually from teenagers at this stage of his career. The Marlins have developed this reputation for teaching guys changeups and mixing around their grip the way that they throw it and putting them in position where they're fully comfortable with it and use it as an out pitch. And White is he's a little further ahead of even other premium prospects in terms of his comfort with that. He was already using it a little bit in the limited action that we saw here. So yeah, really high upside with him. We saw very little of him so far, but at the same time, that's very little for us to be concerned about. So far, it's kind of the biggest question I would say with White, and I guess a little bit with Noble as well, is you just got to throw strikes. You got to reach a point where your delivery is really repeatable and you're getting yourself into good counts. So in that small sample, White was issuing a few too many walks, and that's usually a big difference maker between whether you're a starter or whether a reliever is being in a position to throw strikes consistently. But yeah, so far the upside with him still looks pretty incredible, and that's why we have him so high up.
And you gotta, his final start was probably his best one. Goes 2 innings. Obviously, you mentioned that, and it's worth noting that he did sign. I think he was the one who signed the latest out of
Mhm.
all these draft picks. He signed for $4.1 million, which is way over slot as expected. But for a guy like him who was expected to be one of the higher picks in the first round, that just what you have to do. He went 2 innings, struck out 2, walked 2, didn't give up a run, and only gave up 2 hits. Besides that, his other 2 starts were a little shaky. Gave up 3 runs before that, and then in his first career start, he gave up 4 runs, but none of them were earned. So that's just one of those weird stat lines in baseball. Aside from that, I think it's worth touching up on Xavier Edwards, who makes the top 10 for us. MLB pipeline hasn't graduated. We decided to keep him as a prospect just for a little bit longer. Felt like more time was necessary there, but obviously Edwards was the AAA player of the year for the Marlins, and I think we could agree with that one easily. He now makes the top 10. Great season for him with AAA Jacksonville. One thing that stands out about him is obviously not something that I see in baseball, and I mentioned this in the write-up. I don't know if it's still there, but the bunting. I mean, this is a guy who bunts so much more than anyone I could think of in this organization. Besides, I don't know, maybe not seen with the speed, but right now the only issue with Edwards is where will he play on the field. Right now we've seen him a lot at second. We saw him at center field at the start of the season during pregame. Obviously, you take that with a light grain of salt, but taking reps at shortstop. Eli, before we get to Troy, because I just forgot, I completely forgot Troy was our biggest riser on this list. Xavier Edwards makes that jump into the top 10, I believe, for the first time in our list. Do you expect them maybe to get some reps at shortstop? Will they give him a chance there during spring training? Kind of like what we saw at the start there. They made a lot of changes there in that infield. Give them a shot there, see if they could maybe find something there if they are unsuccessful in the trade market and free agency.
Um, Now, some of the feedback we've gotten is people are getting greedy. They love seeing what Edwards showed in the big leagues already, and they wanted him even higher here. So probably I held him down a little bit more than you or Isaac did, just because that there is that big limiting factor in terms of his batted ball quality. The reason why he bunts a lot is because a lot of his other batted balls, are just singles at best for him. The top end exit velo with him barely gets into the triple digits. It's the kind of data that you just rarely see in the big leagues. It is, I guess, if you want to be really optimistic, you say, wow, he could be like a Luis Ariz style hitter, but Luis Ariz is a total outlier in that regard. So with Edwards, it worked at AAA. He won the AAA batting title, hit 350 in
Yeah.
AAA. It was awesome. It's a lot more complicated in terms of translating it to the big leagues when you just don't have the home run ball as a potential threat in you. But good plate discipline, good contact skills, and as you touched on, the defensive situation is a big one to watch. Right now, he's just not a strong defender at any position aside from second base. And they tried. They tried center field this year. He had a lot of experience at shortstop and at third base in the minors. But on those positions, the arm doesn't really fit on those sides, on the left side of the field to make those plays. Now, that is something that I guess you could potentially improve. That's one area where even this far along in his minor league career, like that's something you could learn over time. But the clock is ticking a little bit now that he's in the big leagues. Now that he's on the 40-man roster. Um, he's as filled out as he's going to be at this point. Like he's not going to get all that much stronger. There's just nowhere for that body mass to go when he's has such small stature with him. So he's a really interesting player here. I'd say overall he did improve his stock a little bit compared to where he was when the Marlins acquired him in the first place from the Rays. He's got a good shot at being on the opening day roster next year. It's just really narrow lane that he's trying to follow in order to be an actual everyday player. You just don't see a whole lot of everyday players that have his skill set right now.
And even if he isn't an everyday guy in 2024, I mean, still coming off the bench, making those spot starts here and there, he was still a very valuable big leaguer for the Marlins. I believe in the playoff series, he's one of the only guys who actually had an RBI in there. And just kind of going through his major league stat line, I know he hit 295 there. He was 295, 329, 333 with a 663 OPS. This was in 30 games played and 84 plate appearances. So decent sample size there. Hopefully he will not be on the list by the start of the season. Now let's get into Troy. Troy goes from 23 to 7 on this list. By far the biggest jump I think we've ever done on any list, any rendition of the Fish on First / Fish Stripes top 30 list. Troy obviously just no other way to say it. This guy was raking at every single level. He ended up being a double A all-star as well, and he didn't spend too much time there with the Wahoos, I believe. He spent only, well, never mind. He actually spent a good amount of time there. 83 games. He hit 296, 396, 567, 963 with 18 home runs, 83 RBIs, and then with AAA Jacksonville goes 323, 403, 520, 923 with 8 home runs, 833 RBIs. He has a 2020 season, first minor league 2020 season for the Marlins since 2008. Troy mentions his improvement at first base. He played a little bit of left this season. Eli, I think this guy, you can make the case that not only he has to be protected for the Rule 5 draft, because most likely if he isn't, he will be the first guy taken off that board or even top 3 pick there. And we know that he's a guy who's seen, who teams have been interested in taking him to Rule 5. Maybe they didn't because they were a little unsure of what he could do at the big league level, but now he's definitely proven that he is more than big league ready, and he definitely should be on the Marlins 26-man roster come opening day, or at least protected.
Yes, yes, at least protected and on the 40-man roster. And once again, getting a shot in spring training to show himself because he, as much as Edwards, just has nothing left to prove in the minors. And the upside with the bat is a lot higher considering the power that he showed this year. Last year and earlier in his minor league career, it was hit over power. And then this year, it was a lot of hit and it was a lot of power. So you get excited about that. Um, it's some of the same defensive concerns as with Edwards, where it's really first base for him, and frankly, it's just not a good defender at first base, at least not yet. Um, so hopefully that improves. I would say like he made a big improvement himself offensively this past year by losing weight and becoming a better base runner without sapping his power. If I was him, I would just put as much focus as possible in towards the defense in order just to make sure that he has a place on the field where he could go. Because if he's only a DH, it's really hard to get on the field consistently in that role. And it'll really just start in spring training because I think we remember last year he didn't have a good spring training and he
Not
was
good at
pretty
all. Yeah.
quickly out of that equation. So you don't want to read too much into that. You just want him to make an impression that's a lot different than it was last year. Because even last year we were thinking this guy could potentially break through to the big leagues, and I'm sure he's disappointed that he didn't get that opportunity at the end of the year. We had that discussion about him over Yuli Gurriel. That never happened. And so now moving forward, I think Gurriel is going to be out of the way. We'll be curious to see what exactly they do at first base. But this should be a pretty awesome story considering how lowly regarded he was coming out of the draft, drafted near the very bottom of it, and yet still making it this far with nothing left to prove. So in a system where it's just it's so hard to find guys that you really trust with the bat, he is one of the exceptions. He just congrats to him continuing to get a little bit better every single year. At this point, he is ready for that next challenge in the big leagues.
Yeah, I mean, if Josh Bell doesn't return and Troy ends up having a really good spring, kind of that Jordan Walker type spring we saw last season, doesn't have to do exactly the same, but has to hit enough to where Miami really can't send him back down. They can't send him to minor league camp, and he would be maybe not even an opening day starter. Maybe they sign a first baseman, but if Bell's gone and they really don't bring anyone in, and they kind of rely on Arise to be the backup, Troy may be the starter. But let's move on to 11 through 20. The outlet, we are the outlet who has Will Banfield ranked the highest, so we'll go to him first. He goes from going unranked in our prospect list to number 20. He is someone who is an interesting case, drafted in 2018, should be in the mix for the catcher spot on the opening day roster in 2024. Banfield really has relied on the power. I think that's just the best way to say it. 23 homers, really not a very high on base percentage, but aside from that, still has arguably the best defense out of Fortes and Stallings. If you want to look at it that way, he's probably the best. He's our highest ranked catcher in the organization. So in this list, and he's probably the best catcher in the organization if you want to make that case. Eli, this is a guy who's definitely going to have a shot at the 26 opening day man roster. You're muted.
His defense has been good throughout his minor league career, and that was no exception this past season. Just really well-rounded in that regard when it comes to blocking and throwing and receiving, all that stuff. Yeah, the question is exactly how much of this offense was real. One thing that I pay close attention to when evaluating hitters is, are you doing it at a new level or are you repeating a level? He did spend quite a bit of 2022 at AA, and he spent this entire year there again. So it went really well, but it was heavily reliant on homers, heavily reliant on pull side homers as well, where it's still to me a pretty big question about whether he's going to hit in the big leagues. I think it's going to be occasional power. When I was talking through this, actually, right when we released the list, I was talking to one of our commenters about it. It's, if you want to be optimistic, the profile is a little bit like Mike Zunino, who has been in the
Yes.
majors for the better part of last decade, who has accrued a lot of value, but by hitting his career average in the majors is in the 100s. It's in like 190 something. To me, I think that is the general profile you're looking at So Nino had to be a pretty incredible defender in order to get as much playing time as he did. And he also had to have huge power that I don't think Banfield has quite that type of power. It is that general mold of player where the strikeouts are going to be there, but hopefully there is just enough with the defense, with the intangibles that he sticks in the big leagues for a while. And this is a player where he hasn't played at AAA, so it's not quite as obvious as Troy and Edwards that he's completely major league ready. It's also when you look at the alternatives that the Marlins have, and right now catcher is such a big weakness in the organization. The free agent options aren't all that desirable either. So
I agree.
because of that, he could get an opportunity relatively soon. And yeah, I hope it pays off because by all accounts, he does have a lot of those intangibles that you look for in a player. And this was a really refreshing improvement that he made offensively after year looking like kind of a lost cause as a hitter. He showed enough with his power that covers up for some of the other deficiencies or concerns that you have.
And I am glad you mentioned the translation of his offense from the minors to the bigs, because he wasn't this good offensively ever in the minor leagues until you got to look at the end of the 2022 season with the Wahoos, where he was pretty good. He was making more contact than power, and he wasn't even getting on base that much. He was all right, but he was good. I mean, for the most part, especially in the playoffs for the Wahoos. And then you go look at this season. I mean, most homers in his career. He's like just most WRC plus in his career, aside from 94 plate appearances in rookie ball. This is one of those years where maybe he makes a good impression in spring training, but it wouldn't shock me if they put him in AAA to see, at least at the start of the season, to see what he could do. And if this is something that's consistent, he proved that he could do it throughout a whole year. Now he has to prove that he could do it in back-to-back years. I think is the best way to put it. I don't know if you kind of would agree, because he never had even reached 10 homers in his career. So this is arguably the most power he's ever relied on, since 2018.
Right. When it comes to catchers, you have to be especially patient. This is the position that takes the longest to develop out of all other positions because of everything you have to juggle from just being a normal hitter to also calling games and every aspect of catcher defense. For now, it just takes time. You could look at the Marlins and Jacob Stallings as an example, even though his Marlins experience went really badly. My point is, he was in the Pirates minor league system for so many years. He was DFA'd. He was outrighted to the minors. Nobody wanted him. And then eventually in his late 20s, Banfield is only about to turn 24. Sometimes it takes until your late 20s as a catcher to really put it all together. And that's when Stallings emerged as an everyday type of guy. And then he won a gold glove and he was hitting enough combined with the defense of the Marlins wanted to make that trade for him. And it was a popular trade at the time. It sometimes just takes very long for these catchers to become who they're supposed to be. So it would not be all that unusual for Banfield to spend even one more year in the minors or most of next year in the minors and then 2025 finally break through. So as long as he doesn't take a step backwards when it comes to the power and how, because that's going to be so important to his offensive profiles, occasionally hitting balls out. This is a position where there's so few guys around the league at the major league level that people really love and trust unconditionally. If the Marlins don't have one of those, there's still room for them to improve and get closer to league average. And so Banfield at least has that upside of being better than the options they were relying on in 2023.
The last guy who made another huge jump for us goes from unranked to number 16, Javier Sanoja. He started the season off with the Jupiter Hammerheads at low A, and he ended it with the high A Beloit, the Beloit Skycarp. And just worth saying, kind of a similar profile to someone like Xavier Edwards. Quick player, lots of contact. I believe he played a lot of center field as well this season. So nice to see. He will be playing in winter ball. He's going to go to a weight training course, I believe is what it is with the Marlins, like a weight program before that. So we'll see him in winter ball. He had a really good winter ball season last year in 2022. He wasn't expected to play, but he was just, I guess, just circumstances ended up having him play, and he was really good. And he's another guy who we're very high on, and wouldn't shock if he kind of cracks that top 10 after we see guys like Dane Myers and Edwards graduate, and maybe even Jacob Amaya.
Right. He is an interesting player, someone that was also not very highly regarded when they signed him originally internationally. From the beginning, he's been an amazing contact hitter. And for now, he still has opportunity to stick at a premium defensive position. Highly unusual for somebody at this stage of his career to play so much center field and shortstop rather than just focusing on one infield or outfield. Usually players choose when they're coming through the system, infield or outfield, and then they become a utility player much later on when they're just hanging on and looking for an opportunity. So it was a interesting developmental choice by the Marlins to have him split time between being center field and being in the middle infield. And as far as like what I saw, I think he's still really solid at both of those areas. So there's a lot of value just in that. If you can make contact and you can play those positions and you can steal bases, like that alone gets you pretty close to being an everyday player sometimes. With him, even more so than with Xavier, the power is so limited. He's so tiny. He hasn't really filled out much yet, and the frame is only about 5'7". Um, Unless you're Jose Altuve, there are very few exceptions that really generate a whole lot of power from a body that small. So that is going to be one of the other big limiting factors here. Finished last year at high A. I'll be curious to see what the assignment is. Like he's a guy that because of his defense and his contact skills, they could fast track him and like bump him up to double A originally already. And rather than have him focus on playing every day, if they just want him realistically to be a utility guy, he could be up to the big leagues pretty quickly. But that'll be a decision for the new upcoming player development people, the incoming staff, as to how they feel about him. This is again a type of player that you don't see them become everyday big leaguers very often, but he's still just 21 years old. There's still time for him to figure this out, and I'd say he's a little bit ahead of schedule. The fact that he's already made it up to high A and had some success during that portion of time.
And you could kind of make the case he has a decently high floor at this rate. I mean, just get especially that option where you could have him in the infield, outfield, kind of a slot hitter there, contact guy, high on base, very fast, steals a lot. So that's just something else we look at when going to this ranking. 31 stolen bases at low A, 36. So, totals out to 37 stolen bases throughout the season. Obviously, not Nasim Nunez type stuff, but still pretty good for just a full minor league season. Last guy we could touch up on here, I think we're good. So we could go on to the next 10 on the list, where I think this is where we see a couple new additions on here. First, I do want to talk about, or the last 10, yeah. Let's go with Fabian Lopez first. This is a guy who was unranked on our list last year. He ended up being one of the better international prospects. Here, a lot of international prospects you'll notice just from the middle of the list now here to the bottom. Won't touch up too much on him. Obviously, just lack of information, not much video. But Fabian Lopez was one of the better international players. It kind of felt like, and maybe you would agree, like it kind of felt like one of the more disappointing international seasons for these guys. I mean, not too much success. Those all-stars that they were chosen weren't putting up the greatest numbers. But if there's someone who was, pretty good at the moment playing shortstop right now, it's Fabian Lopez. And a big thing, not only for him, but most of these young prospects is just a high strikeout rate, a little too antsy at the plate. You can make the case, but we'll get into that when we talk about, Giancarlo De La Cruz, who I definitely want to mention.
Yeah, there's just no individual guy in the DSL that truly raked this past year. There were some like Lopez, like Giancarlo De La Cruz, that were solid. And with Lopez, he made such a big splash his first week of the DSL season. He was amazing, and that was enough to get him into the DSL All-Star game. But for most of his season, it was just really meh, nothing too overwhelming. The reason why I felt he's still top 30 caliber is there's a good chance he sticks at shortstop, and the upside offensively is pretty good if he makes better swing decisions as he goes up through the minor league ranks. So yeah, this is we'll see. We'll learn a lot more when he's in the FCL next year, presumably.
Better luck.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's not a whole lot to go into other than he was, aside from Gennaro Miller, one of the guys who fell out of our top 30, Fabian Lopez was the second biggest signing bonus of anybody in that class. So they had a lot invested in him, and I think overall it was a decent first season for him. And with some of these other players getting traded and a few others graduating, he kind of moves up to fill that spot in this list because at this stage of his career, there's still nice upside that you can dream on if the new player development strategy and instructors are able to keep these guys on the right course.
I want to touch up quickly because obviously he was the Miami Marlins minor league pitcher of the year. Pat Monteverde, he arguably has his best season as a minor leaguer throughout his minor league career. Starts with the Pensacola Blue Wahoos, really looks just really good and dominant. Has some really good outings, keeps it going. Goes to AAA, spends a couple days there, comes back, and just that second half of the season has been really tough for him. He was futures. He was on the futures team this year, the futures All-Star game in Seattle, along with Nasi Nunez. But we put him at 21. Obviously, the age just something that kind of puts a factor into that. I think they're guys we kind of feel a lot better about at this rate in their careers. And Patrick Monteverde likely at some point next season, if they need him, he will probably make his major league debut. Expecting him to start at AAA with the Jumbo Shrimp. Jumbo Shrimp.
Right. It's hard to look past the lack of velocity for a guy that he tops out in the low 90s, but more often he's sitting in the high 80s with that pitch. Early on in the season in AA, he was piling up, not just having success, but doing it by getting so much swing and miss that we weren't expecting. It was really exciting. Getting a lot of it on his fastball, especially. They were using different pre-tacked baseballs in the Southern League during the first half of the year. I don't think it's a coincidence that the second half of the year, using a more traditional ball and grip, that his pitches just didn't miss quite as many bats as they did in the first half. And I think you have to say that the second half is a little bit more indicative of who he is than the first half is. That being said, the fastball command is really good. If he gets it up in the zone, that will still be that'll be a recipe for success. And I like both of his main off-speed pitches. I like his secondary pitches. I like his slider and I like his changeup. Those can also get some swings and misses when he's locating pretty well. So as somebody that has good control and that does have a relatively deep pitch mix and has this big sample of work, he's in a position where going into next year, he's close to stretched out for a full-length starting season. So he's one of those rarer pitching prospects that the training wheels should basically be off and they'll be just ready to go and help out the rotation when needed. When needed, I do agree with you that more likely than not, he'll make his debut next year. And the question is how exactly he is able to get around that lack of velo, because the margin for error is just really tiny when you can't blow past guys strictly by velocity.
I think it's worth noting just with Monteverde and as we mentioned with Troy and then I guess Banfield. I believe Monteverde and I know Banfield that is Rule 5 eligible. So is Monteverde, correct?
No, Monteverde
No.
still has another year before then because he was just
Jeez.
drafted in 2021. But as you also referred to, age-wise, 26 years old at this point. Yeah, relatively old. Doesn't mean quite as much for a pitcher as it does for a hitter in terms of that. But yeah, I'd say that if you flipped the halves of his season around, if he had finished on a dominant note, would probably be having him even higher up the list. And I know some people are even more bullish on him than us at number 21. It was still a good season for him. I don't think he was a top 30 guy entering the year by anybody's reckoning. So this is for a player that they drafted in like the 7th round, something like that. It's still going to be good value if he is able to give you some spot starts as soon as next year.
Cody Morissette only played 23 games. I'm sorry, not 23, 14 games in the 2020, 84 games in 2022. He suffers a huge injury, really bad injury. I believe he's like, he broke his leg essentially. Makes rehab starts with the Sky Carp. Then he comes back and he has an all right season. I mean, kind of looked similar to his 2022 season for the most part, at least, until he got injured. This is a guy who kind of tapped into some power. I would like to see him at third base. That's mainly, I think that's where I kind of projected him to be moving forward in his career. Third base, second base. This is Isaac's guy. We won't talk too much about him, just kind of run through it. But I think Cody Morissette will definitely start at AAA. He has a good chance at it. He's someone who was in the 2021 MLB draft, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he's been pretty good. I mean, I like the power that he possesses.
The thing, as you touched on, the health concern was a little bit scary, but once he came back from that, at least he was available for most of this year. And the power is really interesting for somebody that has a relatively thin frame, even at this stage of his career. Well, what was holding him back is just his platoon splits more than anything else. He's a left-handed hitter that still is not hitting lefty pitching at this stage. So that is the one area that he needs to improve most at this point. Relatively high round draft pick. They felt pretty safe about his offensive floor. And to this point, it's been a little bit kind of below what you would want from that. But once he is fully healthy in 2024, that's going to be a huge year for him. I'd say he's somebody that he could be a significant riser next year if everything goes well with that. But he is relatively close to the big leagues if he's able to become a more complete hitter instead of just relying on those occasional homers.
The highest reliever on our list is Anthony Maldonado at number 27. We don't think he'll be on this list next time around, assuming that he does make the 26-man opening day roster. This season in AAA, this guy was just insane. There's no other way to say it. He had his season cut short just a bit by injuries, at least. He obviously ended the season just kind of the middle portions of the season. 1.76 ERA. FIP is at 3.4, but he struck 13.89 Ks per nine, 411 walks per nine. He had 9 saves, 34 games, and 46 innings pitched. Eli, I think it's simple to say that this guy is nasty. I believe he mainly relies on his slider. This is going to be a really good player, really good pitcher for the Marlins in the at the major league level. Kind of look at just track record too. Andrew Nardi, maybe this guy could be the next, not next Andrew Nardi, but next Andrew Nardi in terms of just the success he has at the major league level.
Yeah. You really can't show you much more than he already has in AAA. It was not just this season, but even late in 2022, he was called up to AAA and he had success there. At this point, you have a full year's worth of work at AAA that has been a sub-2 ERA while also pitching high leverage situations. His slider is really fantastic. My only area of pause is that he relies so much on it. He throws it like 2/3 of the time, like Steven Okert, but from the right side. That's how reliant it is, where it's sliders until you force him to do something else. And it's not just so much swing and miss, but the command that he has of that pitch is really special as well. The question is going to be with that fastball. The velocity at times this past year got down into the low 90s. You'd like to see more of a velocity differential between those pitches and have an opportunity to actually finish off at bats with your fastball instead of always relying on the slider. Yeah, in some ways there are similarities to what we saw with Matt Barnes last year. I think that's the floor really, is a declining Matt Barnes, where if the fastball is not going to get guys out and you're only relying on that slider, then you're a middle reliever or you're a low level reliever. I think he's definitely a big leaguer and he's going to be around for quite a while. That itself is going to be a victory. We'll just have to see where he goes with that fastball, whether it's about gaining velo, whether it's about just changing the way that he throws it. Maybe instead of that, releasing it in a different way in order to get different spin on it so that it is more of a weapon right now. So that is kind of the big question, is how that's going to play in the big leagues. He at least has one really special pitch, and sometimes that's all you need as a reliever. In order for him to close games at the big leagues and be a real high priority guy for the Marlins, it's that fastball is going to have to come along a little bit as well.
Joe Mack is someone who was one of our biggest fallers in this list. Goes from 19 to 28, 9 spots down, and rightfully so, honestly. And if it wasn't for you, Eli, I think it would have been off this list if it was up to Isaac and I. 218, 295, 287, 582. He had 6 home runs, 36 RBIs, and a 69 nice WRC plus. This was a guy who was drafted for his bat, and that is the least that he has shown throughout his minor league tenure so far with the Marlins. Someone who just really hasn't been that good. And I know I won't spoil his list too much, but I know Alex Carver doesn't even have Joe Mack in the top 30 anymore, and he's as high as anyone on any minor leaguer. So just I guess your process to keep Mack on here, Eli.
It starts with being an actual catcher. I think he has shown to this point that he's not quite Will Banfield, but I think he's a real defensive catcher. And that in itself, when you're still so young, We talked about how long some of these catchers take to develop. He is at this moment he's still 20 years old. He's going to turn 21 later this off season. There's still time on his side, and for him to already be up in high A and spend a full season there, the reps that he got this past year was really valuable. To get those reps, unfortunately, yeah, it didn't look great offensively aside from like a 1 month window during the second half of the season where he had a
Yeah.
power surge. Like all of his home runs came in a big clump right there. You'd like to see that more consistently with somebody like him because similar to Banfield, the batting average is going to be limited no matter what. If he is able to get to the big league level, it's going to be a lot about the walks and a lot about the home runs for him. At this point, I'm just not totally ready to write him off. The previous year, he missed a lot of time due to injury in 2022. And I think next year is going to be pretty crucial for where he is in terms of how the organization views him overall. Like, no doubt the production is going to have to be a lot better, especially if he is repeating high A for a portion of next year, which I guess that is my assumption, is that he'll at least start off back in Beloit again. Yeah, no doubt next year is going to be pretty huge for him. I still see decent upsides here. I still see a guy that could be a part-time big league catcher that is not, he's not going to be a well-rounded player, but I think there's still possible that he comes somewhat close to being the guy that they drafted in the first place.
Last two guys I want to quickly run by here very quickly because obviously just these guys are newcomers to the list. Giancory De La Cruz, he's another FCL, no DSL product. I there was some video on him. We kind of were talking about it. It's like some Jesus Sanchez type swing stuff, and Bryant, and well, we'll say Juan Soto, and that's nice to see here at least so early on in this guy's career. He played a lot of center field, exclusively I think center field, which is something that really stood out to the Marlins organization. I spoke to Adrian Lorenzo on the record. Something that really stood out about him was center field, and that's big. And last guy we'll quickly touch upon here. I told Eli and Isaac we needed to add someone who's not really on many lists, and that was Giancory De La Cruz. I don't think he's on any list right now in any top 30. And the other guy who made it onto MLB Pipeline, funny enough, first before any list is Juan De La Cruz, who I do want to touch upon here. Eli had a lot of success at the complex. He was pretty good in Jupiter, still 19 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong, and he has a long way to go, but fits that mold of any Marlins pitcher. Changeup is something that's going to develop throughout as we go. Pretty good fastball for now, and still 19, long way to go for him.
Yeah, at this moment, the control is what is going to be pretty important in determining whether or not he's a starter or not. The velocity needs to go up as well. Righty, who as of this past year was averaging about 91 on his fastball to this point. So certainly a lot of time on his side in order to take that next step. It says a lot about the fact that they gave him so much time in Jupiter as a teenager. That is pretty unusual for them to be treated as a starter, given that many reps and make it up so early in the season to do so. I think that speaks to how he was separating himself from some of the other players from his same international class in order to get there first. Yeah, so he's a big mystery box. He still has a long way to go, and it will, yeah, check back in a few years before we get any super duper strong opinions on Juan De La Cruz. But yeah, intriguing guy that wasn't really on our radar whatsoever entering the season. His stock did go up because there were flashes. There were a few outings, especially throughout the season, where you saw glimpses of somebody that is pretty tough to hit and has some starter traits that will become kind of easier to understand once he gets more experience under his belt.
I will say that Jupiter rotation is going to be pretty fun to watch. Noble, Thomas White, and Dela Cruz. That's going to be pretty fun, unless they promote Noble, which is I don't think that'll happen, but we'll see. Just quickly run through some of the guys that we dropped. We dropped Ian Lewis, Gennaro Miller, and Jordan Groshans off the list. I think the big one is Ian Lewis. Eli, this is a guy who just struggled. There's no other way to say it. His biggest highlight of the season was stealing, I think, 5 bases in a playoff game, and that's not pretty good. He went 0 for 5, I believe, in that game, and that's about it. Guy who really, I think we've said it many times, he should just focus on hitting from one side of the plate. Switch hitter, do it from one side. Jordan Groshans, just at this point, it's yeah. And I know you were someone who was debating big time to keep it on the list. That was one of our big discussions. Should we keep him? Should we take him off? Isaac and I I wanted to take him off. You wanted to keep him on there. And Gennaro Miller, just someone who didn't show much, and he could be someone who we add soon enough once a couple guys graduate.
Yeah, with a lot of these guys, less so than you. I just don't like to put so much weight on a single season, depending on the circumstances. So, and somebody like Groshans and Ian Lewis, both of them are kind of on the fence in that respect, where there were some things to be discouraged about. The fact that they were repeating levels they played the previous year and getting worse results at that. It's a pretty big red flag right there. Um, yeah, with both of those guys, they need to make pretty significant adjustments. With Groshans, he needs to get into better shape. And unfortunately, the one aspect of his game that he's been rightfully dinged for is the lack of over the fence power. And he's still kind of searching for it, a way to tap into that again. So right now, you have to assume he won't quite be able to add that to his game, which leaves him with a very limited profile that just doesn't translate very well to being a corner infielder in the big leagues. With Ian Lewis, the weak side of his switch hitting is definitely the left side, or I should say, hitting against lefties as a right-handed hitter. When he hits as a lefty, his results have even this year were pretty solid. So if he focuses on just being a lefty hitter full time, um, I still have a little bit of optimism. Still relatively young. He's going to be entering his age 21 season right there, and the athleticism that he has, the batted ball quality that he can tap into is pretty exciting. It's just it's taken a little longer than we hoped for him to start putting it all together right there. Um, so that is kind of yeah. There were a lot of these guys, unfortunately, that just didn't quite hit the way that we thought they would in 2023. Understandably, that has led to some pretty wholesale changes with the organization, and yeah, it was kind of splitting hairs for a lot of this list. Guys, even outside of the honorable mentions, that I think could be pretty interesting right here. It's a system that is really thin on guys that you can really look at as everyday starters in the future as position players. So that is what's going to have to change. And I mean, ideally, they're able to put together a staff that it's not about just getting new players. Hopefully, some of these guys in this organization that we are a little bit skeptical of right now, with the right instruction, the right best practices, that they can break out as soon as next year. Other organizations do it, and the Marlins, especially as a smaller market team, that's something they absolutely have to get better at in order to keep up, in order to fill out their major league roster and do it efficiently.
So let's just quickly glance through the honorable mentions. We won't touch up on any guys, just one. So we have Waylon Castillo, Evan Fitter, Bennett Hostetler, Eric Lara, and Ian Lewis. The one guy I want to mention, and you brought him up specifically, was Bennett Hostetler, who after getting off to a very slow start with Beloit, he goes to Double A, and he's really freaking good. There's no other way to say it. He
Yeah.
slashes 249, 371, 481. 851 with 14 home runs, 42 RBIs, and a 128 WRC plus. He's improving as a catcher, but also playing the infield. This is a guy who some way, somehow we have to fit into the top 30 next time around.
He set an interesting path where he was a super late round draft pick in 2021 and then pretty immediately impressed. Then they converted him to catcher entering 2022 from an infielder to catcher. And kind of unsurprisingly, his offense went way down when he was focusing on catching. Then this year, he kind of found middle grounds where the fantasy of him being a full time catcher, that might be a little unrealistic, but he was playing the corner infield spots, an occasional catcher as well. The way that he hit, especially the last couple months of the season, that's why I felt he absolutely needed to be in the conversation. Those last 2 months in July, August, September, he was OPSing about 1,000 over an extended stretch. So even as a relatively old player for his level, I think he's going to be 26 already. Despite the age, when you hit at that level and you can at least fake it at a premium position like catcher, that's somebody to keep an eye on. He really hits the ball hard. He's, as we touched on, an organization with very few really great offensive performances. He was right near the top of the list this year.
And I think that's about it, Eli. I think we covered everything we needed to. Definitely, I think what I like about our list, and I think we haven't mentioned this. We kind of go by a little bit of everything when we kind of come up with a list: ceiling, floor, where they project at the big leagues, just how they, season overall. I do like that we kind of put out some names that not many outlets have, and that's a big thing. Obviously, Will Banfield being the big name. Xavier Edwards is still in there because we personally just think he needs. We personally think he's still a prospect, but putting him there in the top 10. A lot of these guys are international guys. I do think this is obviously no list is ever perfect, but it's perfect in our way.